Можете, пожалуйста, минуточку вашего внимания. Минуточку, пожалуйста. Have your attention, please. Thank you. Before we start our lecture, I just wanted to make a few announcements. До того, как мы сейчас начнем доклад, хотел просто маленькие такие сообщения передать вам. И как часть программы нашего расписания у нас, просто чтобы вы имели в виду, у нас обед 12:30, потом отдых будет от 13 до 15 часов, потом доклад и ужин 19 часов, и вечером сегодня у нас будет вечер талантов, такое как бы свободное время, еще лучше познакомиться друг с другом. А также хотел уточнить и подчеркнуть важность наших workshops. Мы разбили всех вас на 10 групп, и прошу, пожалуйста, следите за порядком. Это очень важно, чтобы нам это правильно провести презентации. Все должны быть в своих группах. А если какие-то там вдруг возникли особенности, тогда, пожалуйста, обратитесь ко мне или к Кате. А так, пожалуйста, придерживайтесь к списку групп. Just wanted to make a small announcement in regards to our workshops. It's very important for the success of the presentations and the workshops that we have established. We coordinated everyone into 10 groups, and we please ask that you stay in your groups. We can't have 20 people in one group and 5 in another, and I understand that maybe there's someone who's a closer friend to you than someone else in the other group that you don't even know, but this is also part of the incredible opportunity you have to have your friendships grow with people that you don't know yet. So please, for the success of these presentations, stay within your groups that you were assigned to. If there's something specifically that you need addressed because you don't feel comfortable in your group, you can bring it to my attention. Of course, we'll do the best that we can so that you enjoy your time here. But please, we can't have 15 people in one group and 5 in another. So please stay within the groups that you were assigned to, or if there's something specific, please address it with me personally. Okay. Сейчас мы начнем наш доклад. Отец диакон Патрик Хайнс выступит и расскажет свой путь в православии и раскроет нам тоже, может, интересные важности идентичности православной веры и путь к этому. Отец Патрик закончил магистерскую программу в Свято-Троицкой семинарии в Джорданвилле. То мы очень рады, что Свято-Троицкая семинария сейчас выступает на выше и выше качество образования богословское. Я сам тоже закончил семинарию давно-давно. We'd like to welcome Father Patrick Hinds to give his speech, his lecture about also his path to Orthodoxy and his current path in Orthodoxy. Father Patrick finished the master's program at the Holy Trinity Seminary. Sometimes it felt like it. And I'm sorry. And we welcome Father Patrick Hinds. Thank you so much, Father.
Hello, Your Grace, dear brothers, dear fathers, and beloved brothers and sisters. I'm honored to be speaking at the All Diaspora Orthodox Youth Conference. It really is a pleasure and very grateful to be seeing a lot of old faces from when I was a counselor at St. Seraphim Camp and when I was a participant at St. Herman's Camp. These are youth conferences in camps in America, and then meeting a lot of new people that I didn't know. And that's one of the really amazing things about ROCOR that I've come to really appreciate is the connection we all have to each other. I have no blood relations to anyone in this room. I'm 100% sure, 99% sure, but I feel like whenever I meet someone in ROCOR, down the road I'm going to meet someone who knows them. And in that way I form a spiritual relationship with them in the church. And that's something that in the lecture I want you to really think about, is that connection you all have, not just as to your friends, but to people that are in your church, and how that connection is constantly growing and constantly can be deepened. My lecture focuses on two main questions. What are the struggles of being Orthodox in the diaspora, especially for converts like myself and credos who were born in foreign countries, meaning countries that are not predominantly Orthodox, and of course, Orthodox identity. Both questions are relevant to this conference, I hope, and I hope that the lecture doesn't surprise anyone. We have had two fantastic lectures where we've really dived into Orthodox identity. I'm hoping it supplements what you've heard and what you are going to be doing together when you work together. When Father Andre asked me to speak on being Orthodox in diaspora, I didn't know immediately how to answer that. It's a complex question. It's even more complicated when you came into the church in the diaspora. So there's a different experience of it. In terms of Christian belief, the foundation for a long part of my life wasn't there. It was something that I gradually learned to lean into. And so that's why I'm also speaking about my conversion. Before my conversion to Holy Orthodoxy, I had always felt, as I was getting more and more interested into spiritual things, I had more in common with Orthodox Christians than my non-Orthodox fellow citizens, my American friends. And sadly, the reality continues to grow. And society in my country that was once Christian has so far denigrated that even the heterodox have become further from us. And being a Christian is more than a cultural artifact that we are given at our baptisms and we somehow maintain without having any genuine faith in it. When we take on the name of Orthodox Christian, we say that we believe in the Orthodox faith, and we act as Orthodox Christians. And we know that it's only possible to be saved through Jesus Christ, and it's only in the safety of the church that we are protected from the overbearing influence of a rapidly decaying, but paradoxically evolving world. We guard ourselves from the world's influence not because of the technological advances or the natural changing of ideas and societies, but because of its hatred and disdain toward the God-man and his followers. In almost every way, the world shows its contempt for the teaching of the Lord and his saving works, because the Lord calls into question its works and teachings. It wouldn't be an Orthodox ROCOR conference or gathering or talk if I didn't bring up St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco. He, of course, is our beacon of our church, and I thought it would be important to look into what he thought the goal of Rokor was and the goal of Orthodox people in their identity. And so I found this famous quote that we might be familiar with. If we're not, I'm going to read it. He says, "The task of the church abroad is to prevent the dispersion of the children of the Orthodox Russian Church and to preserve the spiritual values that they brought with them from the motherland, as well as the spreading of Orthodoxy in the countries where they live. This task is still relevant and must be taken seriously. And in my talk, I want to examine and think about these spiritual values that he mentions. It's important because we've been told, and will be told many times, that we are here to preserve and work towards the preaching of the saints, preaching the faith once delivered to the saints, and to those in the various countries we now call our own, and where orthodoxy is a minority, and often not even a significant minority. And so the question becomes, what are the spiritual values? They are primarily, of course, faith, hope, and love. These are words that we are very familiar with in the epistles and the gospel. They're probably the most common overall concepts we understand, and not only as concepts, but as real particular things. God is love, for instance. So we have faith in the doctrines and teachings of the church, hope in the saving power of our Lord and his second coming, and love for God and neighbor. In order for us to increase our faith, there must be an awareness of what faith is. This does not necessarily entail studying theology. St. Gregory Theologian is pretty explicit about who should study theology and why we should attempt it in the first place. However, all Christians have a duty to maintain the love and the faith that tradition has been handed down for us. And in our Rokor, we have a very obvious lineage, and we have very obvious connections to what, as Bishop Renee talked about yesterday, the people who fled their homes hoping to preserve that. And as St. Athanasius the Great says, let us look at the very tradition, teaching, and faith of the Catholic Church from the beginning, which the Lord gave, the apostles preached, and the fathers kept. Upon this church is founded, and he who should fall away from it would not be a Christian and should no longer be called so. So it's important that we take this responsibility seriously, lest we risk shaming ourselves and the name given to us at our baptisms and confirmed in us by the Holy Ghost. And faith begins in the heart. Helpful to obtaining and maintaining faith is often to recall the saints and life of our church, and particularly the examples of those glorified and set an example in our Russian church. We've heard the lives briefly mentioned of our metropolitans and our bishops and our priests, but you also have your family who are Orthodox, and even if they're not necessarily saints yet, they have passed down to you spiritual heritage. And that's why you're here, because you have something in you that wants to increase your faith. And it takes a while, and it starts at different points, but the identity revolves around that. And it's easier to be encouraged, in my experience, by those closest to us. It is not without reason that we are so often reminded of the life of the new martyrs. These new martyrs literally came from every station in life, and each life of theirs bears a spiritual reminder. When we think of those many, many lay people who are numbered among the saints, who were able to bear and withstand the countless big and small temptations, we should understand this as one of the spiritual values that St. John is asking us to preserve. The one act of being faithful to Christ when amidst certain death or exile, while being seen as simple Christians, reveals that they have been given by God and maintained a deep and significant understanding of the reality of Christ to the cross. And the struggle of our Rokor in foreign lands and under new governments and ideas should also remind us of the spiritual value of keeping our confession unblemished and alive. So that's faith. The next is hope. Hope might be an overlooked aspect of the spiritual value that the church teaches. Hope can sound cliche, the way that it's used in movies and shows is very sappy. But hope informs how we look at our culture, our society, and our fellow man, and we hope for the restoration and increase in virtue, love, and repentance among not only ourselves, but our society. We don't merely lament, although lamentation is justified, but also remember the promise given by the Lord to his disciples. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and the door shall be opened to you. An author that I am quite fond of once wrote in a letter to his son that I do not expect history to be anything but a long defeat, though it contains, and in legend may contain more clearly and moving, some samples or glimpses of final victory. This final victory is realized now and today whenever we recall and live in the promise, strengthening, and divinizing power of the Lord Jesus on all those who truly take up their cross and follow him. Love is probably the culmination and most obvious sign of our Orthodox identity. God is love, and in love there is no division and darkness. By this all will know you are my disciples, if you love one another. We best show ourselves as Christians when we have love. Love not only for those close and near to us because of external and worldly ties, but love for all who hold in themselves the image of God. That is to say, all people, and love for all things that God has made, as we are the caretakers of the earth, a job given to us by our first parents, Adam and Eve. In praying for the gift of love from God, we are simultaneously acting as if the gift has already been given. Indeed, it was at our reception to the church, and it is continually given to those who humbly and without ceasing act and believe in the Lord Jesus and his church. One such action of love is evangelizing in a myriad of ways the Gospels to all of those around us in every moment of our lives, becoming a living icon. What our Orthodox identity is, has been talked a lot, but the message at it is it has to be experienced and lived, the core. Another reason that we are speaking about the spiritual loves of faith, hope, and love, spiritual values of faith, hope, and love, is that they are rapidly disappearing. What was once commonly spiritually understood only a few generations ago is becoming non-existent. We live in non-Orthodox countries for the most part. Our households must spiritually hearken back to maintaining the practices of the faithful in Orthodox countries, the small and seemingly automatic things, such as daily prayer, we did morning prayer this morning, frequent making of the sign of the cross, something that we do in church a lot. We make the sign of the cross in church all the time. We made it when we're gathered together. But in our daily lives, that was, you read stories of old Russia, old Greece. Make the sign of the cross among pious lay people who couldn't read was done so often. It was so important. When you make the sign of the cross, you strengthen yourselves, you guard yourselves against the temptations, and it's a reminder of who you are. Attendance at the divine services, most notably the liturgy, but also the vigil, weekday services when possible, and being a source of encouragement and support to our brothers and sisters in their Christian struggles, as they are to us. Our Row Corps has a complicated and intense history that developed a strong sense of community and purpose. There has been a legacy of spiritual foundations grounded in maintaining and keeping, for example, the unique liturgical traditions of our church and the dynamic and living preservation of our Orthodox teachings. And these are plain to see just in our interaction with each other and with the church. And when I go into this next part about my conversion, I want you to think about what were some of the things in Row Corps that particularly led me to Row Corps. Why is it that Since I joined the church in 2015, I've only been in a local church. I never really went to the Greeks or the churches. I always felt a deep connection with Rokor. I always felt that when I entered a Rokor church, there was reverence, and there was also people with real human emotions, and were part of their country, but also distinct. I was born into a Muslim family. The first thing I ever heard was my father whispering the Shahada, which is kind of a declaration of faith. It was the first thing my father told me. He said when I came out the womb, and then when the doctors had cleaned me up, he came over and he whispered the Shahada in my ear. My father, funny enough though, had converted to marry my mother. He converted to Islam to marry my mother, and only when they separated did he revert to Christianity. And I vividly remember my father responding to the call to the altar, which was common in Baptist, Protestant churches, but a lot of Protestant churches. It's a call to the altar, if you're not familiar, there is no altar in a Protestant church. It's kind of like the stage. But I would be giving a fire and brimstone, or very eloquent, which I'm not doing, and a nice sermon, and you might be affected spiritually, you might weep. And so they would do a call to the altar, where if you felt you had been touched by Jesus, you would come to the front here, and that would say, I want to recognize the Lord as my Savior, and I want to join the church. And that's when my father did one of those moments. And he baptized, and me and my family, my siblings were baptized when I was around 10. And I felt conflicted. After my parents' separation, when I was 7, we primarily lived with my dad, who no longer was a practicing Muslim. But for a few years after that, I tried alone to be a Muslim, to live as a Muslim. A decision my father respected, even if he didn't understand why. It was the same thing when I converted to Orthodoxy. My younger sisters readily accepted my father's Christianity. Islam was not the kindest to women. I'd always been the child most interested in religion. And my mother and Muslim family members, speaking to them recently, actually, after I was a deacon, and they recalled that it was quick to ask questions and loved to answer questions about Islam and God. And it wasn't until around 10, after I'd been baptized, that I began to have doubts about Islam. From the influence of attending church with my dad and Sunday school and Wednesday church school, I started to compare Jesus in the Quran and Jesus in the Bible. Towards the end of 8th grade, I began to doubt Protestant Christianity. The churches we attended as a family began to feel improvised and without solid grounding. I didn't like that we could go to 3 or 4 different churches and hear different interpretations of biblical topics, some of which contradicted each other. I was simply bothered by the dominance of preaching being what church is, and in the many Protestant churches we attended, in the long hours, church often seemed to be performative. These things made me doubt that these were the same kind of Christians I read in the Bible. I was most excited when we would commune in my Protestant churches once a month. This was tiny cracker and grape juice. It was the closest thing to a sacrament I had come across, and that would happen every 2 weeks. You would have a special communion service where they would literally read the passage from the Bible, and you would have your cracker and your grape juice, and that would be communion. But that impacted me. It felt like something ancient. And as I read the Bible, I was confused as to why the practices in the Bible seemed so far removed from the worship services I attended every Sunday. These questions honestly led me to distress, and eventually I began to call myself a Christian deist. I called myself a Christian because I wanted to believe in Jesus, and a deist because I wasn't sure how God interacted in the world. I first became aware of Orthodoxy at 14 and began to acquire and attend churches around 16. As I mentioned, pretty young, by 13, I was calling myself a Christian deist, but I was aware of the incompatibility of deism with Christianity. I began to watch Protestant apologetic videos and read Christian books. Protestant apologetics are where they defend the faith. Apologia is the defense of the faith. It's very Western and rational, which pleased me a lot back then. I told myself that even though I didn't want to believe, If God involved himself in affairs of men, and then he and God would not shun me if I genuinely tried to open myself a little bit odd. The first time I read Anna Karenina, I was hugely impressed by it. I was swept away by that book, but what swept me away and what got me was the orthodoxy in the background. Now, we all know Tolstoy was not a good Christian, but he could write, and in the background, the church is there. It's the Church of Russia, it's the Russian church. And I was so intrigued by the Orthodox Church, and I kept reading classic Russian literature because I wanted to get the feel of it. I was saying, oh, this is a great book, but also the Christianity of these people in the Russian church is so profound. It really did touch me. And once I began to look into Orthodoxy, I needed help accepting a lot of Orthodox teachings, such as that on the Theotokos. As a Protestant and Muslim, it seemed most foreign to me, despite what could be said of a technical respect for her in those religions. The first Orthodox book I read was Wisdom from Mount Athos, written by Saint Sophrony and his elder Saint Silouan. This book probably had the most lasting effect on me and opened me up to the teachings of the church. Saint Sophrony and Saint Silouan even now are really powerful saints that I look to read when I'm feeling that I need to come back to understand my Orthodox identity. The character of Saint Silouan, this Russian elder on Mount Athos who had almost no education, he jumped off the pages. I could sense his holiness and love from God just from reading the words on the pages. The book is very thin. And I'd never experienced anything like that with all the apologetic thinkers and theologians I had read in the past. And two things in the book especially moved me. The first was regarding the sinlessness of the Theotokos. As I mentioned, this had been bothering me, something I could not wrap my head around. In the book, we hear about this incident from St. Silouan. In church, I was listening to a reading from the prophet Isaiah, and at the words, "wash you, make you clean," I reflected. Maybe the Mother of God sinned at one time or another, if only in thought. And marvelous to relate, in unison with my prayer, a voice sounded in my heart saying clearly, the Mother of God never sinned, even in thought. Thus did the Holy Spirit bear witness in my heart to her purity. For some reason, I immediately believed in the Orthodox teaching, solely based on the witness of St. Silouan. So I profoundly and respected and admired him. The next one in the book is the anecdotal story of a scholar who keeps returning to St. Silouan, and another monk asks why he goes to some illiterate monk with no education. The scholar replies, "You need a scholar to understand the teachings of St. Silouan." And I felt that way as well. I thought of myself as smart and critical and, advanced. Still, by reading this elder, my hypercritical mind was quickly taken to his teachings because of the palpable holiness coming from the pages of the book. His deceptively simple teachings and writings revealed a deep and practical knowledge of God. His experience of God showed me that I could know God this way through the church and through struggle. As I read more ancient and new saints, I saw that modern saints were performing real miracles. One such saint is our own St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco. And this particularly about Roport and our identities that, as we've heard from Bishop Renee and Bishop Joe, there are people in our church who have that same holiness and who are not yet glorified, but we bear that spiritual witness through them whenever we interact. And from reading that book and going to my first Roport church, I felt the same thing. I felt that the holiness and simplicity of St. Silouan was in the Roker Church, was in the church I was attending through the priests I met and the people I talked to. Who were normal priests, normal people, nothing necessarily I could write a book about. But when you interact with someone and when you experience someone in conversation, often you can get a feel of how they are. And I felt in most of the Roker churches I was attending a deep, deep feeling. At the time where I lived, though, I was only aware of the Greek church in my high school. It proved impossible to attend. I would call the church and no one would answer. And I was 16, so I didn't have a car, and I couldn't get to church, so I did it. It wasn't almost 2 years later when I moved to New Jersey that I attended my first Orthodox service at a Ukrainian Orthodox parish. I didn't understand a single word of the liturgy, but it was a profoundly moving experience. And then 6 months later, I began to attend a Roker church. I started attending a parish called Our Lady of Kazan. Father Mark Burchek, if anyone knows him, he's a great priest. The Roker church was closer to my church. I was closer than the Ukrainian church. I didn't have a car then, so getting to church depended on other people. Our Lady of Kazan was 25 minutes away, so my dad gifted me a bike, and I began to bike there for vigil and liturgy, back and forth. And the community at Our Lady of Kazan was extremely kind, and I felt extremely welcomed at the parish. People spoke to me, which was important for converts. When entering Orthodox Church for the first time, the experience can be intense and confusing, but having someone say something friendly and kind to you helps you not feel alone. And I was impressed by the history of our Roker and its dedication to the truth of Orthodoxy. It was mainly through the readings of Father Seraphim Rose about St. John of Shanghai, San Francisco, that I began to feel akin to the historical reality of Roker. And I felt that the rich history and holy people would make a strong foundation for building up my Orthodox identity. Getting my parents to understand that I wanted to attend church every Sunday and most Saturdays, and that liturgy was 2 hours away was challenging. It was more difficult to convince them that vigil was necessary. But looking back on it, I'm surprised by how lenient my dad was. I was young, I was 17, and I had a lot of zeal without knowledge. I had many strong opinions. I wasn't willing to back down once I had accepted something. It was not even Orthodox. I was baptized 2 weeks after my 18th birthday, and I was teaching. Someone would come up to me and say something about Christianity. I said, oh, no, this is actually what the church believes. It's very, very crisp. This is probably the most dangerous thing for a young convert or someone rediscovering their faith. Before I attended Our Lady of Kazan or any Orthodox church, I've been primarily getting my information from reading books and articles and talking to people online. Of course, this is dangerous. Orthodox identity, the phronema, the thought process, how you think, is not communicated well online. Without speaking to someone in person, having a community, the connection I spoke about earlier, it's easy to find books and articles that agree with your particular view. I was also able, in fairness, to join groups and speak to people online who challenged what I thought. And there were many online groups that I'm grateful to this day for just helping me when I was not able to attend a church. In some ways, this was good because I saw the difference in orthodoxy online and orthodoxy in life. But for many years, because of that, I had erroneous ideas floating through my head. And many of these issues became balanced when participating and regularly attending an average parish. The online community can supplement some things you may not get from a parish. Still, it should never be the primary or most trusted source of information with contact with a living church community. So these kind of forums and books helped form and educate me when I was just a high school kid with a lot of questions and didn't know anything. And for young people, I say young, but I think close to age, a lot of people here, it is natural to go through a period of intense laziness and intense searching. That's normal. We've talked about that identity, but if you feel like those things are so lofty and I don't feel that, that's normal, that's fine. That is part of the struggle of being a Christian. But by the grace of God, if one is tasked with this particular cross of not having faith or not having it fully or zealously, there is maturity that God gives us when we work towards it. We're just acknowledging that. And you can look at other people here who are going through what you once went through, even though they're not saying that, and reflect on where they are and reflect where you will be. I was baptized and chrismated December of 2015. Like I said, only 2 weeks after I turned 18. A year later, I began to attend my first year of college. College and being newly Orthodox was difficult, as I'm sure college and being Orthodox for a long time can be difficult. A lot of difficulties with my friends and family. There was a different understanding. It wasn't obvious, but it was something in the way that we thought that was different now. And a lot of you might understand that, even though you talk normal to your friends like that, some things just feel a little off, like you know that they don't agree completely, and you don't expect them to agree completely, but the underpinnings are different, and it can be difficult to walk through. And this impacted my day-to-day decisions. I would not have been able to maintain my orthodoxy in the first few years if I hadn't started attending St. Elizabeth, New Martyr. It's a church in Princeton. It's my home church where I serve now. It's an all-English parish in Roquefort. We have a lot of converts and a lot of Russians and Ukrainians there. And it was the closest Roquefort church to me at my college. And through interaction with that church, I was able to get a strong feeling that I have my friends in life, but I really have my family in the church. And having a family in the church makes it important because, like Bishop Renee said, you kind of have to choose who you love more. Your love for God has to be primary. And your love for your friends, you have to deeply love them, but also understand that there might be a parting of ways and be willing to accept that parting of ways. It doesn't have to be like an actual friend breakup, but an understanding that you can't go with them everywhere. St. Elizabeth New Martyr is a very popular convert saint. A few parishes are named after her, a lot of parishes in the West especially. She was born in the German Confederation, and for many in Roquefort, she's the patron of converts. St. Elizabeth took a selfless and true Orthodox identity and joined the faith of the nation she had married into. She was not forced to. She was not the Tsar's wife, so she didn't have to be forced to convert to Orthodoxy. If you read her letters, you see her writing to her family saying, I began to feel conflicted. I believe in Orthodoxy. I'm surrounded by the Orthodox throne, the Orthodox identity, but I'm still a practicing Lutheran. I still am technically a Lutheran church, and she couldn't do both. She understood she has to make a choice. And then the deep piety of her husband, who was killed, and the example, gave her the real reason to convert, because she saw in her heart that what she was reading, what she was seeing was true, and the people closest to her, and the people just in the Orthodox nation, the Russian Orthodox nation. And the grace-filled experience of authentic Christianity made it evident that she should join the church. And I'm recalling her experience because I often think about St. Elizabeth when I reflect on my conversion and how grateful I am to God for showing me the church. And I think about my experience with the Russian church in the Diaspora, our Roquefort, and how, like many entering a foreign land, I immediately felt at home. And I also think about the many devout people and their examples that made me accepted not for who I am, that's a slogan, God, no, but for what I could be and what God wants me to be. And my parish is an all-English Roquefort Parish in New Jersey. It holds an extraordinary place in my heart. It was the first Roquefort Parish I attended and could understand the whole service and share that common experience of conversion. My parish helped me go to seminary, financially supporting me, and Jordanville, which is which is the holy site in America of the monastery. It's a holy monastery. It was a necessary experience for me because I saw some of what, I've never been to Russia, but I saw what the spiritual heritage from Russia was like. It still exists in Jordanville. And after this talk, if you want to speak about seminary, I'll be glad to speak to the side about that. Since COVID, our parish has experienced a lot of ethnic Russian and Ukrainians coming to our parish, and I see the universality of Orthodoxy every Sunday. There was something in my experience that's so great about Ropor. The ease to which those who are not, ethnic Russians are accepted because of the shared Orthodox faith and the love for the Russian Church, which I think is important. Someone asked a question yesterday, how can I be proud of being Russian without going to the extreme? Well, you just do it. You're just proud of who you are and what you come from, and like we've said, the faith is not affected by personal decisions of people. People sin, that's what it is, but the actual faith is important, and remembering who you are is important. And to this day, I'm noticing even more church experiences, a growth of converts in the church, and I'm so happy that people like you, who are a lot of you cradles, are there for them when they come into the church, because you can share your orthodoxy to them and give them an example about what orthodoxy is when it's lived. And that's very important. In closing, we've spoken about Orthodox identity, primarily the acquiring of the Holy Spirit, St. Seraphim has taught, the journey that shapes us and changes our mindset. We must be open to this change, even when it contradicts the world's mindset. Often it will. This identity we hope to attain is love and holiness. We should be working on emanating love for our neighbors and striving to imitate the holiness of our saints. We have a high calling from the Lord. Be ye perfect as I am perfect. But God, knowing his free creatures, understands the difficulty in this. He has given our own church numerous examples of holy elders and saints who in their very walk, their lived experience show us what Orthodox identity is. We can look to multiple examples for confirmation that we are staying on the golden but narrow royal path. When recollecting my conversion for the first time openly like this, I am assured even more that it was God who led me to Holy Orthodoxy, and only in the safety of the church, the pure heart, is one able to see God. I'd like to end with a quote that I believe is even more relevant today as when it was written. This quote is a call that perhaps even now is misunderstood or taken with reservation and confusion. Still, it must be proclaimed and pondered in these last days. It has been touched on a little bit, not very explicitly. Saint Justin Popovich is one of the many recent elders and saints of the church, Serbian church, and one that experienced Orthodoxy and had a strong Orthodox identity, so strong that God glorified him, and he is now an example to all of us. Writes in a paper titled The Inward Mission of Our Church Bringing About Orthodoxy. Here it is. It is now high time, the 12th hour, time for our church representatives to cease being nothing but the servants of nationalism, and for them to become bishops and priests of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. The mission of the church given by Christ and put into practice by the Holy Fathers is this, that in the soul of our people be planted and cultivated a sense and awareness that every member of the Orthodox Church is a Catholic person, a person who is forever and ever and is God-human, that each person is Christ and is therefore a brother to every human being, a ministering servant to all men and all created things. This is Christ's given objective of the church. Any other is not an objective of Christ, but of the Antichrist. Thank you.
Very well-prepared lecture. Your references were unbelievably specific to our topic, and the connection that you made with faith, hope, and love, specifically also in your path to orthodoxy and in your current path in Orthodoxy, I think are very important for young people to hear and to also get a chance to understand that even in the world that surrounds us is not supportive sometimes of what we believe in, that you were able to underline the importance of community as in a parish for support. And I think that's very important that we're all here to take back to our parishes understanding of this community and to help the parishes to participate in the life of this community, the parish. So thank you so much, Father Patrick. I'm sure that there are probably some questions that they would like to ask you, maybe even personal questions about your journey. I think that are important because sometimes, even though we wish that everybody was Orthodox, but we can't have that. So always, it's important for us to understand how to also have a relationship with non-Orthodox people. So maybe somebody has some questions, please stand up.
Don't hate me, it'll be 5 minutes for what, so you ask questions that I'm willing to answer, so. Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing your origin story. I relate a lot to it. There's a few other confidence here.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, I have a lot of questions, hopefully we can talk more after. How do we best encourage like inquirers to seek the Orthodox faith while still utilizing the tools that are present today, such as the internet, and to choose the Orthodox like what you said earlier, Orthodox online?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's a relevant question. I think, the old and tried and true method, firstly, is just to invite someone to a church. If you, in certain areas where you live, there should be an Orthodox church around. I think simply first, before you get into particularities that they've probably already looked into themselves, they need to just go to a church. They need to attend a church. And I think that's a good sign first. If they're willing to go every Sunday to an Orthodox church, if you're looking around, then you don't have a commitment to anything else, so it should be okay going to church. I think attending a church every Sunday, actually walking up to the priest there and talking to them, you don't have to like his answers, but I think people tend to ignore their parish priest. You should talk to your parish priest. Ask him questions. He doesn't have to be a genius, he doesn't have to be a theologian, but he was given grace by God in his ordination, and that grace should be used. So I would say tell him to the Orthodox parish, and remember that it's okay to look online, but your spiritual father, your spiritual community, even if you're not Orthodox, is not found online. It's found in a parish. So attend a parish, give them resources. If you know things that they can understand and read about Orthodoxy, of course, have them read it. But it should never be a community where someone is listening to someone they don't have physical contact with. I think that's dangerous, and I think it always has to be connected to the parish. So that's my answer.
First of all, thank you for such a flaming, with faith and dedication speech. And I have kind of a follow-up question of what Taylor said. So when the person actually came to church, and you also say on the receiving end of this maybe new convert or a person who is interested in Orthodoxy, sometimes, as you also described in your path, they're really motivated and a bit overwhelmed with all the information they're getting, also coming maybe from non-religious or Protestant background, and how can we better guide a person who wants to know all the answers, so to say, advanced about liturgy, about theology, about patrology, like about everything, and you know the answers, but you know that maybe it's not the best to overwhelm the person even more with all the details.
Yeah, that's extremely common, especially for Western converts. I'm speaking about Western converts because I'm in the West. It's very common when you first enter Orthodoxy, you have a lot of zeal, which is fine. You come to the church and you want to know, a lot of Christology. You want to know about the history and why things are complicated and why there aren't black and white answers. And you think that just someone who's in the church must know those answers. That's not something that you as someone who's in the church can fix. Converts especially, go through periods. They come in very enthusiastic, and then there's a difficult period, and then how they go through that is how they respond. I think the best thing is to answer the questions you think you can actually answer with confidence. Don't push anything. Leave it, again, to the parish priest. I think the best example lay people give is their actual example of how they attend church, that they are reverent, they're kind to people. It's not the duty for you to try to fix someone's mindset. It takes time. I think coffee hour is a great thing. Trapeza is a great thing. That's a good time to actually invite people to your table. You don't know them, but have them sit at your table. It's good. Incorporate them into the social life of the church. And I think when people feel like they're part of the community, it's much easier to wait on answers for other things. Some things take time. So I would say just answer the questions you feel confident in answer. Things that feel, even if they feel a little off, I would just direct it. I would direct it to someone who knows better, the priest most likely, and invite them to coffee hour, things like that. I think those are practical steps, and I think the person will do the rest. They'll decide. You just have to do basics. Magdalena?
Did you find it difficult to reshape how you were raised to be women, being raised as a Muslim, or were you turned away from Muslim because of that ideology?
It's a good question. It's a really good question. And I thought about that a lot. I would say that my sister's experience of Islam was different from mine. I'm a man, obviously, male and female, God made them. And yeah, I had privileges that they didn't have. I was allowed to do things that they weren't allowed to do. And I think that in our life, we think about equality two ways. That things should be equal in the sense of being able to find work and stuff like that, and that there's a natural hierarchy of just what jobs people do. That doesn't work in a religion where you're using a God as an excuse to frame how someone encounters God, because you can't encounter God if you're being suppressed a certain way. I think my sisters weren't able to encounter God because they were being bound by these rules that God didn't make, but man made. And man made at a particular time in history where life is very different, and that was demonic to begin with. So I think they had a different experience. And I think I understood that later. And I think, I think it probably did take me a while, once I became a Christian, to adapt to viewing people. Then again, I was 7 when my parents divorced, so by the time I was 10, I'd been living among Christians and stuff like that, and saw that everyone just interacted with everyone. And then I had to not go so far. You have to be careful too. You can't respect the other gender so much that you just appease and do whatever they say. You don't just blindly jump when you're told to jump, or go somewhere you're told to go. People have to make their own decisions. The church gives us guidelines, but I think the way we even frame male and female questions in Islam is just completely different. In Christianity, there is a real freedom and there is a real distinction. In Islam, the distinction is very strong and it is very difficult to get past. So that'll be my answer. So, that's a controversial question. I'm being recorded, so I'm going to answer it anyway.
Could you repeat the question?
When I was in the Ukrainian church, Was there a language barrier? Did it affect me? She has people coming in who are Ukrainian, who think negatively about Church Slavonic and it's being used in the church. And then Father Josiah Trinum posted a video recently about using the vernacular in church. Right? Is that a good summary? Okay. I would say, so I went to a Ukrainian church called Holy Ascension. Very kind people, very good people. The church, when I went in, I mean, yeah, it was, I think, so just to specify, I was 17 or 16, 17, I went to the church. I'm pretty sure they were using Ukrainian liturgy, but it could have been Church Slavonic and I didn't know. So just to be clear, but I'm pretty sure it's Ukrainian. And it was only at coffee hour that they would, because they live in America, they speak English, so at coffee hour, it was all English, it was great. One of the things that bothered me was not, one, I wish I understood because I was so new, I was just so happy to be at liturgy itself. That, the language thing kind of bothered me, but I was just happy to be there. And then the second thing was, what actually bothered me was, at coffee hour, we would sometimes get into politics and Ukrainian history, and that made me uncomfortable. It felt, and this is my experience, I'm not saying everyone does this, but it felt like it was very, polemical and anti-Russian, and I don't have, I do now, but then I didn't have a dog in the fight. It was uncomfortable. I didn't want to form a belief system about people I didn't really know. So that was my problem, not the Ukrainian at first. It was really the problem about how we talked about it. The second question, or the third, because I answered both, I'm not going to speak for Father Josiah. I would say I mostly agree with him, just to get off. I think what Bishop Irenee said is super important, is that we are a Russian church. We are in the Russian church. Our spiritual heritage, and for a lot of us, our historical heritage is in the Russian church. And so coming with that is a reverence for language, as I mentioned the other day, that was built solely for the use of church. So Church Slavonic was made not to be spoken casually, but to be used in church. That's what it is. It is what it is. It's important. It's a language that, for all of us in the Russian church, converts or cradles, has been used in the church for a very, very long time. So it being used is not the problem. The problem is that when we are in church and participating in church in Western lands, in places that do not have a Russian majority, when people want to enter Rokor, a traditionalist church, a church where I just talked about, they feel a connection to, language is very important. It does not mean, the way that we use English has to be careful. Like English, just not any English can be used. I talked about someone the other day. When we use English, it has to be an elevated English. It has to, and that's a problem in America and countries where we want to change language. German or French, it has to be an elevated form of these languages. The problem is a lot of people haven't put in the work to do one elevated translation. One translation that is elevated, is holy, and that we are all using across the church. When we have that, when we don't have that, Church Slavonic works because, one, it's the same. People are comfortable reading and speaking in it, and it unites everyone, and no one's divided. But the problem is, if I go to vigil, and this is where it matters for me, vigil, half the vigil service is hymns, hymnography. You go to the vigil service not just to pray, but to learn. You're actually learning. The church is giving you our theology. It's giving you the examples of the saints. If you don't understand that, no matter how deeply you're feeling the vigil, you are missing something. So that's something that I would want to see more of language incorporated, so that people go to vigil, and that's not many people, but people who go to vigil understand the vigil. Again, at the same time, you have to maintain Church Slavonic. It's not going away. Russia and all these Slavic countries are going to be there, but it doesn't mean we have to get rid of it either. At the same time, it has to be in a language that, it has to be a working. And I think priests and bishops, it's an individual level. My parish works because it's mainly converts, and it's Russians who like that, who like the convert feeling, right? If you go to a parish that's mostly Russian, and you put German too much into it, maybe that takes people away from the liturgy. Does that help? I think that's an individual question. I would say that his point about Orthodoxy being in America for so long, 80 years, the fact that there hasn't been a lot of efforts, things are slow in the Orthodox Church, and it being slow isn't a sin, and us wanting to change into an elevated local language isn't a sin either. It just takes time. And I think for people like me I love being an American, I love English, big fans of both of those things. I'm in an ancient church. It takes time. We have to pray, and we have to do what we're doing. My parish is a very traditional local parish in English. That's not going to happen everywhere. It takes time, and we should maintain what you're doing at your parishes. And if you get a lot of converts or people come in, then your priest will work around it. The bishops know what's going on. So I would say take what he said. I think what he said overall is a good point. I just think that people are rightly worried a little bit that pushing things which have been pushed for a long time, but more recently, will cause commotion. Things need to be done in an orderly manner, and it'll work out. God will give us what we need. We just have to do it for the right reasons. So that's what I would say. It's a long answer. Sorry.